Hello traders, welcome to the Nexoel Trading Hub YouTube channel. So we're going to be looking at the weekly forecast for the coming week, and we're going to start from the dollar index, and this is the monthly time frame. What we can see from the dollar index is, we've called out this fair value gap for past couple of weeks and even months, and we can see how price have mitigated the fair value gap from the monthly time frame, and we saw this rejection of price to the downside because within the sponsorship zone in the daily time frame we discovered the daily bearish order block. And what we can see, we have this doji candle formed during January, and we can see the sweep of this buy side liquidity, and now we are seeing momentum to the downside. So basically, where's the drawn liquidity? The drawn liquidity is actually this monthly fair value gap. So we're looking towards the possibility of price dipping more lower into this monthly fair value gap. So let's check out the weekly time frame. So what we can see from the weekly time frame, I called our attention to this weekly breakout block and the daily bearish order block we found here. And what we can see is price have just been respecting that zone, even though I was expecting to see bullish movement to clear this buy side liquidity. But then we can see again price returned back, and then price respected this sponsorship zone, which is the weekly breakout block zone, and the daily bearish order block. And now what we can see is we have further bearish momentum to the downside. Clearly now we can see that price has closed below this weekly fair value gap. So from the monthly time frame, this is the monthly fair value gap. So basically what we can see is our draw on liquidity is this sell side liquidity, and below the sell side liquidity we have this monthly fair value gap. So we are looking towards the possibility of more bearish movement to the downside. And what we can see, we have this weekly fair value gap that is going to act now as an inversion fair value gap, a bearish inversion fair value gap. So we're looking towards the possibility of the likelihood of a pullback to mitigate the inversion fair value gap. And then we have the bearish continuation to the downside, since we've identified the drawn liquidity from the monthly time frame. And here on the weekly time frame, what we can clearly see is that we have this sell side liquidity to the downside. What we can see from the daily time frame is more clearer structural perspective of the bearish movement to the downside. What we can see, price took out this low point, we had the pullback, price took out this internal buy side liquidity, we had for the fall of price to the downside. Now we can see price took out this sell side liquidity to the downside. Now we have fair value gap in confluence to the weekly inversion fair value gap. First, we have this as the weekly bullish fair value gap, but now we can see volume closed below the violation of the weekly bullish fair value gap, and now we have a bearish fair value gap within the inversion fair value gap. So we can just clearly mark that out. So, and let's change the color to that. So we can see we have a bearish fair value gap in confluence to the inversion fair value gap here in the daily time frame. So I'm looking towards the possibility of more bearish movement. So we're looking to see price pullback into this, and then we have bearish continuation to the downside, since clearly we can see that we have our sell side drawn liquidity, and then we have the monthly fair value gap here. And within the monthly fair value gap, we have this down close candle before the bullish impulse further to the upside. So let's check the 4-hour time frame. Here in the 4-hour time frame, what we can just see is more clear bearish structural perspective, because from the 4-hour time frame we can see we had this high, price fell, took out this low point, giving us a market structure shift. Now since we can see that we have the A leg to the downside, we have this B leg, and now we are seeing price giving us the C to the downside because price broke this low. This movement took out this low points, and now what we can see is we're having what, the break of this last swing low point to the downside, violating the weekly fair value gap. So basically now we're looking forward to see the possibility of a bullish movement to mitigate the bullish weekly fair value gap as an inversion fair value gap now, and we have the bearish continuation. Clearly what you can see from the 4-hour time frame, let's look into that. We can see price mitigating this sell move before the buy move to the upside, taking out the sell side liquidity. So we can see now price is facing mitigation or rejection at that sell move before the bullish movement to the upside. So we could see price sponsor bullish movement to mitigate the daily bearish fair value gap, which is in confluence to the inversion fair value gap. And then we have the bearish continuation to the downside, because we can see price took out this relatively equal low points, liquidity grabbed to the downside. Now we are expecting the probability of bullish movements to mitigate the daily bearish fair value gap, which is in confluence now with this inversion fair value gap. And then we have the bearish continuation to the downside being attracted to the sell side liquidity. And below this daily sell side liquidity, we have the monthly fair value gap. So this is my perspective for the dollar index for the coming week. So let's check out the Euro USD pair. This is Euro USD and this is the monthly time frame. So, you know, a couple of weeks and the past months, we were calling our attention to this fair value gap, and we can see how price dropped to the downside into the fair value gap. And what we can see is just like the dollar index took out the buy side liquidity and then frame indecision candle and gave us bearish impulse to the downside. So here in the Euro USD, what we can see is price mitigated this fair value gap in the monthly time frame. And clearly we can see now we also have this indecision candle after price took out the sell side liquidities here. And now we are seeing bullish momentum to the upside. So basically, where's the drawn liquidity? The drawn liquidity from the monthly time frame is this monthly fair value gap we're having here. So let's drop to the weekly time frame. So in the weekly time frame, in confluence to the monthly fair value gap, we can see we have this weekly fair value gap. And here we have this up close candle before the bearish momentum to the downside. We have price give us this bullish impulse and violated that. Now we can see how price returned to mitigate that in confluence the monthly fair value gap and the weekly fair value gap. And we can see from the weekly time frame, what we have is price now swept the sell side liquidity and gave us this bullish impulse to the upside. Price returned to the downside because I called our attention to this open close price, which in the daily time frame we saw we had the bearish order block. So we can see price give us the bearish movement to the downside, but then failed to take out this low. And now we're having market structure shifts, because we're seeing when price failed to take out this low, we're seeing this bullish momentum. So where's the drawn liquidity? We have this buy side drawn liquidity. In extension, we have this buy side drawn liquidity. And above the buy side drawn liquidity is the monthly fair value gap. So I'm expecting to frame more bullish movements to the upside in the Euro USD pair. So let's check the daily time frame. So here in the daily time frame, what we can see, clearly we can see that market structure shifts, because here we have price gave us this high, fell to the downside, took out this low point. So we had this return to the upside. Price failed to continue strongly, bearish to the downside to take out this low. So we had a shift in the market structure based on the swing low points. Now we're seeing bullish momentum to the upside. So here is the bearish order block, which we can also frame as the rejection block that price reacted at, and we had the fall. Now we can see clearly now price return back. Now we can see the possibility of price violating the sponsorship zone here, because it has been retested, deeply retested. So basically now we can see we are having more bullish impulse to the upside. So we have this as our drawn liquidity. In extension, we have this as the drawn liquidity. Within the monthly fair value gap, we can see also in the daily time frame, we have this fair value gap, which also in the weekly time frame, we have fair value gap. And now we have this up close candle before this bearish movement to the downside. So clearly what I'll be expecting to see in the Euro USD is the possibility of price giving us the bearish movement to mitigate this bullish fair value gap. First, we can see we had this bearish breaker block. Price fell to the downside, return mitigated the bearish breaker block, and we had the fall of price. But price failed to continue strongly bearish to take out this low, in extension this low. And now we have bullish movement to the upside, respecting this daily bullish order block. So I'm expecting to see a return to this fair value gap, and then we frame what? More bullish continuation to the upside. So this is my expectation in the Euro USD. Let's check the 4-hour time frame. So here in the 4-hour time frame, we can also clearly see that we have this daily fair value gap. What we can see is we have this breaker block. This is the last up close candle that sponsored this bearish movement that took out this low points. mitigating this order block, this bullish order block, in confluence to this bearish order block that was violated to the upside. Price mitigated that, and now we can see this bullish movement to the upside. So what we can see is price gave us this movement. We had the fall. Price gave us this impulse, took out this high, fell to the downside. So we have the Quasimodo pattern here. So we could see price respect this price level to give us the bearish movement to the downside into the daily fair value gap, and then we have the bullish continuation to the upside. So this is my expectation in the Euro USD. Let's check out the GBP USD pair. This is GBP USD from the monthly time frame. So what we can see is a reaction of price at the rejection block, and we can see bullish impulse because now price took out the sell side liquidity. So basically now what we can see in confluence to this last down close candle before the bullish movement that gave us this liquidity run, we have the confluence of this open close price, and above that we have the monthly fair value gap. So basically our drawn liquidity is this monthly fair value gap, but then we have the possibility of price reacting at this open close price to give us bearish movement before the possibility of further bullish movement to the upside. So let's check the weekly time frame. So here in the weekly time frame, what we can see is we're having bullish impulse to the upside. But then we know that the condition of the market is still bearish, but we've discovered that we are in a bullish momentum now. Based on lower time frame, we're going to see structural shifts. So what we can now see is we had the fall of price gave us this bullish impulse, price returned to mitigate that, and now we can see further bullish impulse to the upside. So basically we are seeing the monthly fair value gap, which is a drawn liquidity, and now here we have this rejection candlestick here. So we could see price give us further bullish movements, face reaction here before we have further bullish continuation to the upside into the monthly fair value gap as the drawn liquidity. So let's check the daily time frame. Here in the daily time frame, clearly we can frame to see this price delivery in the daily time frame. What we can see is, price is just bearish. We had this high point that sponsored the bearish movement to the downside that took out this low point. So you can see we are bearish, but then now we are seeing bullish price impulses. So what we can now see is we have this rejection block candle where price reacted twice. Now we can see price return into this bullish order block that I've been calling our attention to. I told us to see how price is going to react at this bullish order block before we can consider if price is really going to go strongly bearish to the downside. So we can see last 2 weeks we had this bearish impulse, but we can see volume close to both. So last week I also called our attention to sell to the downside into this daily bullish order block, and then we can begin to consider the possibility of strong bearish movement, or we could see bullish return to the upside. And clearly now what we can see is that price gave us bullish impulse to the upside. Price now violating this rejection block because we can see volume is strongly within the rejection block zone, and price is taking out the buy side liquidity. So clearly now what we can see is price give us this bullish fair value gap from the daily time frame. So my expectation in the GBP USD is to see the dip of price into this fair value gap, and then we have the bullish continuation to the upside. So I'm not really giving deep explanation to this analysis. I'm just giving you guys a very quick one so that you can utilize that during the week. So in the 4-hour time frame, let's get to the 4-hour time frame. Last week I told us to look forward to how price was going to react within this fair value gap. If price breaks this fair value gap, then we could see price retest that as an inversion fair value gap, and we could see price attracted to the sell side liquidity, or we could see price mitigate the fair value gap, and we have what? Bullish continuation. Because this fair value gap is in confluence to the daily bullish order block. This daily bullish order block. Let's get back to the 4-hour time frame so that you can see what I'm saying. So we can see this is that daily bullish order block. So we can see we have that fair value gap. Because I saw this as the next drawn liquidity, because we had the delivery of price on Friday to end here, I think. So I expected us to see more bearish movement into the fair value gap. Then we can determine if price breaks through the fair value gap, then we're going to have the possibility of price aiming for the sell side liquidity and in extension this. But then due to the fact that I saw that price respected this bullish order block, and what we can see from the 4-hour is that we can see this market structure shift based on the swing points, and price gave us this market structure shift also based on this internal structure. and now we can see bullish impulse, price return, price gave another bullish that took out this buy side liquidity. So I expected us to see the possibility of price mitigating this, and then we could go bullish, and that was what clearly happened. And now what we can see is now price is taking out this high points. So basically now we can see we have this unmitigated weak, which is in confluence to the bullish fair value gap identified from the daily time frame. So I'm expecting to see the possibility of the fall of price to the downside into this daily bullish fair value gap, and then we can frame the bullish continuation to the upside. So this is my perspective for the GBP USD pair. So let's check out the AUD USD pair, guys. This is AUD USD from the monthly time frame. So from the weekly time frame, we identify a weekly bullish order block where price reacted at, and we have this bullish impulse to the upside. Price took out this previous month's low point, sell side liquidity, and then we can see volume close above that. So we can now see if price give us further bullish movements back into this monthly fair value gap. So price is here to mitigate the mean threshold of this fair value gap. So I'm expecting more bullish movement to the upside also in the AUD USD. So let's check the weekly time frame. So here in the weekly time frame, within the monthly fair value gap, slightly above the monthly fair value gap, in the weekly time frame, we have this weekly bearish order block. Now, what we can see from the weekly time frame is price reacted at this bearish fair value gap, and then we had the fall of price to the downside. Price took out sell side liquidity, and now we can see volume closed above the swing low point and further sponsor bullish movements, and we can see volume close above the weekly fair value gap. So I'm expecting to see the possibility of a return of price to mitigate this as an inversion fair value gap, and we have bullish continuation to this weekly bearish order block. So let's check the daily time frame. So here in the daily time frame is the reaction of price at this bearish order block. Now we frame this weekly fair value gap. We can see price return taking out this buy side liquidity, and we had the fall to the downside, expecting to have strong bearish movement take out this low. But what we can see is volume failed to close below this low, and we had the bullish return to the upside. We can see price violated this bearish fair value gap to the upside, return to mitigate that as an inversion, and we had this continuous bullish movement. Now price is reacting at this bearish order block, so I'm looking forward to the possibility of a dip of price to the downside into this weekly fair value gap, which is now an inversion fair value gap, and then we frame our bullish continuation to the upside. I'll be looking first to this weekly bearish order block as the target price level if price is going to continue bullish to the upside. So let's check the 4-hour time frame. So here in the 4-hour time frame, where we have the daily bearish order block, we can see here we have this drop, base drop. Price is reacting there. We can see that this candle took out this candle high. Now we can see the possibility of bearish movement to the downside into the bearish fair value gap, which is now going to act as the weekly inversion fair value gap, and we can begin to frame our bullish movement to the upside. So this is my perspective for the AUD USD, guys. So let's check out the NZDUSD pair. So guys, this is NZDUSD, and this is the monthly time frame. We're starting off from the monthly time frame too. So what we can see is the bullish attraction to the upside. Price swept this monthly candle, sell side liquidity, and we can see indecision candle, but then we can see price giving us bullish attraction to the upside into this fair value gap from this candle weak low point to this candle high point. So we have the fair value gap, and price have not yet mitigated the mean threshold from the monthly perspective. So let's check the weekly time frame. So here in the weekly time frame, what we can see as well, we have that up close candle before the bearish impulse to the downside, and price return reacting at this weekly rejection block, and price gave us this bullish momentum. The structure is actually bearish, but then we're seeing bullish momentum to the upside. So what we can see is now price reacted at this weekly fair value gap, sponsored this bearish movement, took out sell side liquidity, but volume closed above, and now we are having bullish impulse to the upside because we can see the volume of this weekly candle closed above this high points. So I'm still expecting to see bullish movement in the NZDUSD, so the possibility of price going higher into this bearish order block, because here we have the up close candle before the bearish movement to the downside, and we have yet unfilled fair value gaps within this price range from this high to this low point. So let's check the daily time frame. So here in the daily time frame, what we can clearly see is we have this fall of price gave us this low, return took out internal liquidity here, this buy side liquidity, we have the fall to the downside. Now we can see price created this liquidity pool, price went to the upside, took out the liquidity, but now we have volume failed to close below the swing low point, and now we can see price giving us bullish rise to the upside. And what we can now see is how price respected this bullish order block from the daily time frame. Though we can see we had this massive fall, but we can see volume still went back and closed above the bullish order block. Price returned to retest it, and volume still closed above that. Now we have impulse to the upside, and volume closed above this high point. So my expectation in the NZDUSD is to see the possibility of price returning to the downside, and we have bullish continuation to the upside. So this is my expectation for NZDUSD. Let's check that from the 4-hour time frame. So from the 4-hour time frame, we can see from the 4-hour time frame, price gave us the structural perspective. So what we can see is price fell here to the downside. We have this return, price fell to take out this low, went further to the upside, and now price fell to the downside, taking out all the sell side liquidity, volume failing to close below that. And now we can see again price is now giving us bullish momentum to the upside. Price failed here to close below this low, and now we have this push to the upside that gave us this change in state of delivery. Price returned to mitigate the last sell move before the buy move that sponsored this change in state of delivery, and now we can see bullish impulse to the upside. So here we have the fall of price gave us this movement, price further went down to the downside. So I'm expecting to see the possibility of a return to mitigate this zone, or price may fall more lower into this price level here. Here we have a breaker, because this is an up close candle that sponsored the bearish movement that took out this low point. So we could see price dip more into this level before we have the bullish continuation to the upside. So this is my expectation in the NZDUSD. So let's check out the gold pair, guys. This is gold, guys, and this is a weekly time frame. Gold has been maintaining its bullish directional bias. So what we can see is that we have the sweep of this high point. Now we have volume close below that from the weekly time frame. So I'm expecting the likelihood of price dipping to the downside into this fair value gap as a drawn liquidity, and then we can begin to look in lower time frame to frame bullish continuation if price is going to continue bullish. But gold has sincerely been maintaining its bullish directional bias, clean bullish directional bias. So what we can see from the daily time frame, since we can't really find other blocks from the weekly time frame, from the daily time frame now, what we can see is within the weekly fair value gap zone, we can clearly see that we have this fair value gap in the daily time frame, and we have this sell side liquidity as a drawn liquidity, and in extension we have this other sell side liquidity. So I'm looking forward to the possibility that if we're going to continue bullish, then price should return, sweep this sell side liquidity, and we can look forward to price sweeping this sell side liquidity into this fair value gap. And then in lower time frame, we can begin to frame our structural framework to go bullish to the upside. So this is my expectation in gold. So let's check the 4-hour time frame. So in the 4-hour time frame, what we can see, we have this impulse, price gave us this pullback, we had this impulse, another pullback, price gave this impulse, failed to take out this buy side liquidity, we have the swing low as sell side liquidity, in extension this other swing low, since we can see that within the weekly fair value gap, we have this fair value gap we identify from the daily time frame, and also in the 4-hour time frame we can also see that as a fair value gap. Now price is reacting at this rejection block, but then we can see this bearish momentum to the downside. So I'll be looking forward for the bearish scenario. I'll be looking forward to see how price may give us this return, mitigate this price level. We have the fall, and then we could see price for the fall into this fair value gap before we frame the bullish continuation to the upside. So this is my expectation on gold. I'll be looking at this perspective and then utilizing that in lower time frame to structure my entries and my exits. So this is all I have to show us, guys, for the coming week. Cheers and God bless you till I come your way next week, guys.